Advanced philosophy memes. We have made good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Advanced philosophy memes. We have made good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Shoutouts to Andreas, Deacon, my boy Scott, Pedro, and everyone else that engages on my posts, and Sarah. Keep it up, man. You'll get there someday. And everyone else from Great Bees.
The last show was cool because we got to talk about Ron Paul Maoism, and I was thinking about how the neoconservatives were Trotskyites, and I don't know. Thought maybe we could talk about Trotsky for a minute or something like that. Do you have any? What are your feelings on Trotsky? Do you have any thoughts?
The Russian guy?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, the
Well,
only thing I can
Soviet.
think of, because I'm woefully uneducated, and maybe
Okay.
some people in the chat are too, is what's the difference again between, because there were several factions, right? The Trotskyites and the Leninists and God knows who else, and the
December.
Bolsheviks and the
Bolsheviks.
Mensheviks, and then it appeared that the totally wrong faction took over Russia, at least according to history, or the wrong faction, the evil faction.
Mm-hmm. And Trotsky ended up stabbed in the brain to death with an ice pick in Mexico City. Yeah.
I don't know. This guy sounds like pure chaos energy. Like he just wanted 24/7 mass mayhem.
I mean, it wasn't Trotsky's fault. Trotsky actually was pretty much the more chill of the Bolsheviks were all about erasing the lobster's evolutionary tract, right? So when Jordan Peterson talks about the lobster, right? Lobster, Jordan Peterson. This idea that lobsters have billions of years of evolution behind what makes them. Marxists know that. That's kind of, I think, where he got this from. It's not that he came up with this. He's just trying to say that it's something that's in the way of societal progress, that there's a hierarchy between dominance, competence, and that, you know the whole story that lobsters will get bigger when they win a fight, and when they lose a fight, they shrink. And so this is a survival mechanism that's biologically ingrained, and equity works against evolution. That's not new information. That's literally what the Bolsheviks were concerned about. And they're saying, look, this is something that's so ingrained in civilization. How do we get rid of it? Because obviously it's bad. And I don't know if you agree it's bad, but there are definitely issues where, and I heard you in the background when I was just getting up here, saying it's an amazing time where people that we think of as super interesting are sustained, even though they should die out, right?
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on what you meant by that, maybe?
Well, I was saying it's ironic that a lot of people talk about how terrible it is that you see all these examples of just mass psychosis and mass mental illness. And I'm like, ironically, it's not all bad, because 100 years ago, these people would have just died. They would have gotten eaten or something. At least now, like, they could just live,
Yeah,
live,
I mean,
complain.
and it's not just that. There's actually some weird benefit that we get from that in civilization, because the more that you have crazy people, the more crazy ideas you get to hear. You can imagine, like in the Star Wars Empire version, where the dark side is, making the Death Star. There's a unity of vision that's going towards a military defense structure and some sort of order, right? The idea of order, everything is underneath that order, and there's no plasticity or flexibility. But in pure plasticity and flexibility, there's often new ideas, strange ideas, things that we couldn't even imagine, and that don't necessarily have even the best function. Maybe they're like, so maybe they're useful, but at the time and place, they don't have the best function. And there's something that functions better, and this is the problem with cold biology, is that it's won out for the reasons that it's in that time and place the best thing. That's one of the things that Darwin talks about, is this idea that evolution is maybe just almost random mutation, but it's herd selective. That doesn't really mean that it's the best thing. And it could be that these rules that we have that we look at as being the best thing are just very contemporaneous, right? And maybe the lobster thing and equity was so bad because survival of the fittest, it was super important maybe for billions of years. That doesn't mean it always will be. Maybe we sustained it longer than it needed to. Maybe humanity's reaching some sort of a point, a crescendo of biology, where we don't need survival of the fittest, and survival of the fittest is the thing that's been keeping us back from whatever new thing, new glitch that not only would be interesting or cool, but might be necessary for survival in the transition of civilization or reality itself.
Maybe I didn't catch it properly, but isn't survival of the fittest supposed to be meaning the one who fits in best into the environment?
Sort of. So it's maybe not necessarily the environment, but it could be the ecosystem. And so the ecosystem is already a different kind of environment. It's not necessarily nature, right? And nature itself is plastic and is changing. So unless we create some sort of an ecosystem that repeats itself through some sort of seasons, and that's usually what happens, is we get stuck in a cycle. So civilization rises. This is something that Michelle was bringing up earlier, that there's a point where states rise, become super powerful, the commons depletes, and then the state can't bear the weight of itself, collapses, and then the commons become essential again. These cycles end up then creating new states because the guilds become corporations, become monopolies of violence, where no one else has a monopoly of violence, and then they become the de facto state again, right? And then we get stuck in sort of this
Oscillation.
That could be avoided. It could be that at a certain point, if we just like allowed nature to become something else, and this is maybe the question that people ask, like how much of our reality is driven by preconceived or preconditions, just general preconditions, and can we replace those preconditions? Or do they just end? Like maybe like this is a long season. This is the spring or the summer, but the fall and winter is coming. And we're going to, after billions of years of some sort of a cold survival system, we end up replacing it. I think, you know that movie Waking Life?
Yes.
With the weird guy, who's like fluid, Waking Life.
I watched that movie on like one of the first times I ever did LSD.
Acid. Yeah, that's basically, anytime anyone ever tells me they're on LSD, I just say,
put on this movie.
Just put on this movie. Yeah. Where's the one I'm looking for? The scene, Waking Life scene. I gotta find, probably every scene will be in this list, right? So if I can go down this here, the telescopic evolution, right? At this point, he talks to the wavy guy who's moving around, and he talks about, these are the systems that we are used to. It's cold, it's sterile. These are the systems of that took a long time to develop, but they were emphasized because they were the things that could endure long cycles of evolution. But billions of years of evolution becomes millions of years of evolution, which turns into tens of thousands of years of civilization, which become hundreds of years, centuries of science, which turn into decades of progressivism, which become years of technological revolutions, which become months of release updates, which become days, become hours. And pretty soon we're at this point we call the singularity. And when we're at the singularity, all the things we emphasized that we're enduring are no longer, we don't need something enduring. That's actually something that's holding us back. It might be that the lobster is keeping this radical form of evolution that we want to see, which might be more empathic or spiritual. I think virtual is a fun word to use. I've been trying to use less religious terminology, and spiritual is easy to replace with virtual, right? A virtual reality is, it's very much when people are talking about this like spiritual consciousness, ooh, it's something you can really describe just as much from a virtual consciousness or a virtual reality. I mean,
The Elon Musk perspective.
this is the one that people are playing with today, you know. And I think there's a reason to reject the spiritual terminology, and that's mainly because it's monopolized by douchebags from the Eastern Orthodox Church or something like that, which I have not really been having a good relationship with. Or God, but I'm honestly, even them, I'll take over it. I mean, there's less child molestation and sex abuse in the yoga studios of the New Age than there are in the intelligentsia of religion. Another thing that Michelle brought up earlier was about the collapse of the Roman civilization into the Benedictines. And I always liked the Benedictine monks because they put little mints on your pillow. You know, if you ever stayed at like a monastery, they're pretty existential in a nice way. And they're kind of focused on returning to like growing food, which is something he brought up, is that why these, you know, relationships were established between the former intelligentsia, the robber barons and the villeins and the Roman elite and the church, right? Because they're looking for someone that they can believe in.
Yeah. Sounds cool.
This freaking guy, man. But yeah, what do you think about that? This idea that evolution itself, I was trying to find the one.
I see a lot of competing singularities, actually. Like there's probably an oncoming singularity, but I see like the technological singularity competing with like the nihilistic ontological shock singularity, or like the spirituality kind of thing where everyone unifies based on that. And it's almost like a singularity is approaching and they all kind of want to like fight over which one gets to be the thing that just causes the whole ontological structure to tumble.
Yeah, and then we need to imagine that there's something that replaces it. And so that's my, I guess my point about the lobster is it that we're saying that something is tried and true. Does that mean that it's something that we always need, or that should we be concerned about just saying, oh, this has always worked, so we don't need to question it, we just need to rely on something that's always worked? Or does it make sense to start to, I think Steve Jobs said, like, most of the common knowledge are just things we haven't thought about, you know, and so we're stuck doing something that's expensive because we haven't found solutions to those problems yet.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, like when it comes to the concept of even like social hierarchies, like adopting lifestyle changes. So, I mean, whether that's your intention or not, to just like stand a cut above a certain percentage of like people. And I kind of do that in like in like a very bitter way. You know, it's like, if this is the game you fuckers want to play, then fine, I'll play with you and I'll make it not fun for anybody, just so you could know it's not fucking worth it. You might as well just get close to God or something, you know, like be grateful instead of thinking like, oh, I want this, I want to be better than so and so, I want, you know, whatever. And ironically enough, like when you do find, you know, I don't know, you could call it God, or when you tap into the infinite source of creative energy in your own way, and successfully and sustainably, well, then what? You know, like then you could successfully use it and apply it to your real life and start actualizing things and individualizing, which is what we all want. You know, like to us, that's ultimate agency, is the freedom to become who we want to be.
And I mean, I think also you've got a perspective on God, you know, that's a little specific. Like your idea of God is like source, you know, that you get back to the thing that's providing of source, rather than some sort of like, you know, a fabricated.
Yeah. Because like I wasn't coming at this from like a religious, even though like my family's religious, like I never was made to go to church or anything like that. So I kind of just stumbled into the idea of a metaphysical source, I guess, of all conscious energy. So and so. That's through like, that was through Hermeticism and all the bro books, you know, like the Kabbalion and whatnot. It's good to start, I guess.
Yeah, so it just keeps bringing me back to deconstructionism. Like, so what are the things that we're really trying to latch onto? Like, vapor Sharia. If I am all I have and I lose what I have, who am I? Right? If you can remove all the values that you were taught make you, because what is free will? If you have rules, if you have preconditions, if your preconditions are defining you, then do you really have free will? Is free will even possible if you come from, if you're inside of a system? If there exists something before you and something that exists after you then aren't you kind of married into what will come and what has been? And so you're really not, there's no free will in that sort of circumstance.
Yeah, within the confines of that specific system. Yeah. So you might as well just accept it, go along for the ride, you know, be like, I'm thankful.
Or shouldn't you try to destroy everything? Like, isn't it worth it then to destroy all the lobsters to boil the sea? Because like lobsters are billions of years of evolution that could disappear overnight. All lobsters could be dead literally overnight. All it would take is the boiling of the sea. You know, and this is right. I mean, it's a climate change. I don't mean that that's the only way that can happen, but like that's kind of the metaphor of climate change is that it kills all the lobsters. It destroys the system.
Yeah, I mean, like I realize like it doesn't really pay to go to war with things, even if it's a system. You know, that's no way to beat it. Like, what are you really in control of? You're not in control of any of these external, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. I'm not in control of any of these external factors that govern these systems. The only thing I can come close to controlling is like my participation in the systems and like of what intention am I participating this game like with, like what am I doing this for? So I mean, if you could find it in you to like have something as simple as, you know, I'm just thankful. I don't have to play this game. You know, I could have never been born. I could die tomorrow. I don't have to be alive, so I could be thankful for that at least, and just enjoy it from there.
Lobsters are bugs. When they tell us that we're going to eat bugs, the elite already eat bugs. They're eating the lobsters. There's definitely a metaphor here. If we're all inside of that cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking like, why haven't they killed me like already? And it's like probably because I'm more valuable alive as a lobster, harvesting something. I don't know.
Thoughts, Raph?
Yeah, many thoughts, but no words yet.
That's 8 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, fair. Well, I don't know. The more I think about,
made me think of, just to introduce some other idea in terms of deterministic reality. I recently had a great conversation with Michael, whom we had on for Starvation of Consciousness, maybe another show. He's also doing astrology and human design, and we spoke about some interesting, you know, new concepts, how to combine these things and how it can actually show you, how should I say, your own profile, your own pattern. And in terms of what you said, predetermined by the system, yes. Then I could argue, well, at the same time, just like Michelle pointed out just an hour ago, if you're born into something and you realize it's broken or it doesn't really match, then you kind of have this call to reform or to change it. Although, Chris, just like you said, there is only very limited factors you can actually control. So what do we do with all of that? But and the other question, of course, is even the reactionary impulse could also be calculated within the system, just like in the Matrix. They already know, oh, there's going to be Zion and you're going to want to reform the system and so on. So how do you really move outside of it? It's kind of tricky, but maybe one thing, again, referring back to the last show, which we could look at is just to create synthesis. So like Chris said, instead of fighting one system or the other, or left or right, whatever it is, maybe it's time we are conscious and responsible and, dare I say, adult enough as a civilization or aware enough that we can simply learn that it's not about labors or anything like that, but you just take the best from everything. And then by the fruits, you will know whether it's actually a sustainable and useful system for the time.
Yeah.
What are some changes you think that we need, though? I mean, like, do you feel like this is the thing? I liked what Michelle said earlier about the Gnostic condition, that some people were born into a world that things are just great. And it's like, if you just keep doing what you're supposed to do, you're going to go to heaven. And heaven's just like this, but with, you know, it's like a retirement home for this. It's just like, if you like this, you're going to love heaven. But if you're really concerned about the way things are and things are falling apart, and you're not trying to go to like a bigger version of this, then heaven isn't the answer, you know, for everybody. Right? The four most overrated things in life are champagne, lobsters, sex, and picnics. That kind of Christopher Hitchens said.
I think another. Sorry,
yeah.
What were you saying?
No, go ahead.
I mean, one of the only things I could think of, like I said, you know, accounting of what you're fully in control of, I guess you could try to understand what could possibly trigger yourself to participate negatively in these systems. Like for me, it's scarcity. You know, like not having enough of something or not having the opportunity to do something again, so I'll do it. And that could easily drive me to be like, I got to buy these shoes, or I got to buy these new set of like tires. Like I got to, You know, it's scarcity mindset. It's this mindset where it's this enforced mindset, I should say, or conditioned mindset where you constantly have to think like, you know, you got to accumulate. You don't have enough. And that's kind of true in a sense because we're mortals, like we're going to die one day, but still like, you know, how scarce are things really? Like, what are we really scarce of? And how much of that scarcity is artificial, you know?
It doesn't have to be this way. That was the one I was looking for. You know, it's kind of sad, like how many of the APM memes are kind of locked in the old group that we can't access. I can still access them, so I can go back and look at them. But do you know this was the first APM meme? It's a picture of Slavoj Zizek and Jordan Peterson as one super mecha lobster. Advance your philosophy. Philosophy, right? Because, right, lobster.
Philosophy. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like it. I like lobsters. Lobsters are cool. I mean, I like those like Japanese psychopaths who just like who collect shells of like crabs and make like mecha out of them with some glue and some model kits trimmings.
What's the crab Japan human face? You know what I'm talking about? There's an evolution of a crab that the Haikigani. You know what I'm talking about? There's this crab that has the human face.
Interesting.
Yeah, so let me find this one. Haikigani crab face. If you click on this thing, it's a crab in Japan, and it has some sort of a story that like this ghost lady lives in Japan, and these are like demons that have these horrifying human crab-like faces that scare Japanese people, so they won't eat. You know, they won't eat them, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back hundreds of years at least.
It looks like Baki.
So this is an interesting one because on one hand, you got this lore about this thing. It's like a myth that is that these are demons. They're spirits. They have the human face. It's looking at you. And because of that, they will avoid this crab. And on the other hand, you have a perfectly Darwinistic expression then. Because of social mutation, humans are afraid of this crab. They see a human face, so they ignore it. So they eat the other crabs. So the other crabs die out. This crab has no natural predator. It expands, it multiplies, it becomes more and more common, and it sustains and endures. And it's a beautiful marriage between some sort of a religion almost that, you know, the social myth that's formed about this ghost demon or whatever the story is. I mean, I'm sure somewhere here it's got like a explanation, interpretation. Yeah, and then Julian Huxley talking about unintentional artificial selection, right? Because we have said out of respect for the Haiki warriors, they're going to throw these crabs back to sea because those resembling samurai will be thrown back to sea. But I mean, just that happened to be a perfect anomalous expression. So that's not a real reason for evolution. It's just an example though where mutations have been naturally, you know, viable, not even really beneficial, just sort of preferable. It always comes back to crabs. Yeah, crabs keep evolving. Yeah, it's true. I agree with that.
So we should get demons on our backs, demon faces.
Something like that. Something to scare away natural selection. Because natural selection is the thing. I mean, that's basically your biggest enemy is natural selection.
How to subvert natural selection, really? Because we already did.
And now we're back to Marxism. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because we already did, right? Like ever since what was it? I think it was early 20th century when we started industrial farming, and we basically like 5x'd our global population over a span of 100 years, which is kind of crazy to go from like 1.5 billion people to like 7.5 to 8 billion within that time frame. That's insane. And if we never had that like artificial fertilization method with like extracting ammonia from the atmosphere or something like that, some crazy bomb tech from like World War I. But if we never did that, we would have had to use like, what is it? I think like 4 or 5 times more land just on farming alone by now to sustain the same numbers. And I think that's like in one way we've subverted like a lot of natural selection there.
I could imagine what you're saying is correct. However, I also saw some seemingly pictures like 100 years old, maybe even more. It didn't look like AI, where already back then they were advocating for electroculture, for example. And I'm just really wondering to what extent as you know, there were technologies that already existed, which may even have been superior, but not as easily controllable as needing to sell everyone my chemical fertilizer as a byproduct of my oil refinery. So I'm really wondering, it's certainly true what you say in terms of population growth, but I'm really wondering if we could have taken another bifurcation. That doesn't matter now, but I mean, it does matter now in terms of which bifurcation we take right now.
I think you're right.
Bifurcations are faster now. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree with Raph. I think there easily could have been a better system, or probably a lot. There would easily have been. It's just the way we did it now. It's like we're literally, our existence is like hinges on control, either some in some way or form, the military industrial complex, because they own all that industrial farming shit, you know.
But it doesn't have to be this way. Like things can so quickly, the seas can so quickly boil. We're in a point where the military industrial complex is losing its power the same way. Like if you can't, it doesn't matter how much fake money you have if you can't buy resources anymore from people that won't sell them to you. Hey, speaking of Marxism, what's up, Andrew?
Yo, howdy doody.
We were talking about Marxism, Ron Paul Marxism, Ron Paul Maoism.
You know what? I think another bad thing was we shouldn't have had this many people so fast.
No, I voted for Ron Paul.
Yeah, the Maoists who voted for Ron Paul, same. We shouldn't have had so many people quickly. You were saying,
I don't know if I'm like, landlords are, you know. I hate when people attach like names to ideologies, but yeah. What's up, Chris?
I almost forgot, but I was about to say, like, yeah, I don't think we should have had like 6 billion. We shouldn't have 5 extra population in 100 years. I think that was like kind of a misstep. But whoever was in control of it was probably like, we need more bodies. Because if you've ever played like those base management games, that's usually how you get ahead, like go up tiers. Like, we need more bodies. We need more people to work these fucking little modules to expand the machine. That's why they did it. That's why they multiplied us to such an extent.
Well, it's the solution to the value of labor. So if Marxism is true, then labor is valuable. But if you can make labor, if you can inflate currency, then you need to inflate labor in a Marxist metric. You deflate the value of labor by inflating the amount of options you have for labor. A state has resources. Persons are a resource of a state. You can refine your resources. You can refine copper into wire, and you can refine slaves into doctors, lawyers, engineers, and trades workers, right? So if you can do that enough, then you get to a point where labor is no longer the value. Then data and care is the value. And Marx really focused on the real issue is the collapse of capitalism happens when, and we see this all the time. It's not like an inevitable collapse of the entire system. It's even just the collapse of Yahoo or the collapse of Microsoft Windows or seriously, like the collapse of the movie industry. Like amazing things were invented for the movie industry. Technology, sorcery, things you can't even imagine were invented because they wanted to sell you a product. And they sold that product and they kept making things better. They kept making the world a better place to sell that product because they were trying to saturate the market, sell as much of that product as they could. And at a certain point, they've sold that as much as they can, right? And then once it's fully saturated, there's a collapse of the capitalist system, not of the whole world, but of that particular market. There's a collapse of that market. And that can be good because it means that the lobsters are boiled in the sea and we can move on. But it could be bad because then we don't have that anymore.
The sea.
There's no way to sustain it, right? And so you have to choose care. And so care, for instance, we talked about, I've seen in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, there's a gas station with a Denny's attached to it. And people are getting paid $20 to $50 to $100 an hour just to work there because it's in the middle of nowhere. They don't want to be there, but they need to because truck drivers have to go through this spot so that they can bring resources from 2 other places where people do need to be. So they have to have a gas station there. And it becomes like a social service, like a lighthouse with essential workers. And the essential worker is not a doctor. The essential worker is a gas station employee, just someone there at the lighthouse to make sure that capitalism can keep running, right? So it's interesting to me how we need to sustain certain things. It's also what Marx talked about. Which services do we sustain when they become no longer financially exploitable, right? Not viable as capitalist marketplaces, but they would be, it would make the rest of the markets collapse if we pulled that one string out. How long can we go without that? Well, at a certain point, someone invents a system where you no longer need a gas station, right? And then that collapses that particular market. But it's only when it's no longer essential and something else can fulfill that need.
Wait, so I'm sorry. What is how does that relate to what you said about care?
So care in that circumstance, a lot of time you might say a doctor, isn't doing something that's super valuable compared to making money. Like a movie maker and an engineer and these tradespeople, they're all making money because they're selling products. But you need doctors to care for these people, right? A gas station has a person who has to make sure the gas station is running so these truckers can get their gas. And not just that, you have to have a waitress there to run this Denny's. And it's not about, in a normal world, you've got this big town and people are driving all the time and they go past the gas stations. There's competition for gas stations. Sometimes there's biodiesel and electric. There's different competition in a capitalist market, which is really cool. But that doesn't exist forever. At a certain point, the market solves itself. And then you get to a point where there aren't people stopping at the competitive options. And you get to a point where you don't have a McDonald's and a Burger King and a Jack in the Box. You just have this Marxist state-run Denny's, the Denny's in the gas station. One thing that they can make sure that if someone in the middle of the night is driving a truck through Alaska where there's no other people and it's snowy on the roads, they can stop here, get their gas, get a meal, and go. And all of a sudden, this gas station attendant and this Denny's waitress, these people have these proletariat workers, this working class, they become essential workers. They're providing care for persons and for services of the capitalist market. So we live in a world like that now, where so many systems have collapsed. You don't have malls, you don't have strip malls like you used to even, but you need to have at least something there so that you can sustain, to care for these other markets that exist. This trucker might be bringing, medicine or food or supplies or energy or iPhones, whatever, Amazon supply. It might be an Amazon truck, right? And the Amazon truck is a thing that killed all of these other businesses, but it still needs a place where it can refuel until they come up with a solution against that. So these are essential workers all of a sudden. And what makes them essential? Well, the lack of competition. And so it was capitalism that provided competition, which meant that there was no longer essentiality to any one person. And these billions of people you're talking about, it meant that no person was really that valuable because you could easily replace them.
Yep, like gears.
So just within that example, I'm curious now, only because you said care so often. What it made me think of course, is the cultish bohemian growth ritual of the cremation of care. Can you please explain how that relates to the example you just gave? You're muted, Andreas.
You could probably take it further than I could take it, because I would relate it to, intellectually, that when the cremation of care happens, they say we're not going to have a war for a week. We're not going to care about what happens for a week. We're going to just all get down on each other's level, and we're not going to have to care about what happens for a week so that we can focus on our interpersonal relationships between businesses. But I mean, I like what you're going with this, because it also is, in effigy, they sacrifice a child, right? This is the idea, like a pig dressed up as a boy is burned, and that's the beginning of the cremation of care, because they fed someone to Moloch, which, back to Metropolis, is this idea that the worker gets sacrificed to Moloch, the innocent child.
I think I could think of like two outcomes that would facilitate, I guess, just further sustaining of like the market of the whole system that we're in. And I think, well, I mean, to get to what you're saying is where we just have like outposts. We need a new frontier, basically. That's if we start colonizing space or even like colonizing underwater. Another possibility is that we have like a drastic reduction in global population. Like, let's say there's only like 1% of humanity left for whatever reason. Maybe it was some catastrophic event or a war. Then you're going to have a more care-based system, I think, because it's all going to be about outposting. Like, we need an outpost. We have routes. We got to set up people at least who could stay at the outpost to man it, to work it, and they could act as relays, because without it we all die. The last 1% hanging on by a thread dies. But that's if we don't colonize space, which will just open up new markets. It's like, come to the space mall, like come to the space casino, the space hotel. It's not like the Earth hotel.
But yeah, with that comes a de-emphasis of the cold, sterile mechanisms. So like competition, survival, those things are de-emphasized. And yeah, that shift towards an emphasis towards like altruistic goals, like friendship, love, cooperation, lack of entropy, efficiency even. I think these things start to replace, and also diversity, phenomenological diversity, ideas, new idea. That's only possible when you get to a point where you can sustain the things which are normally destroyed through evolution.
Reminds me of The Postman and Death Stranding. Both just oddly prophetic visions. Like,
did you play all the way? I didn't play all of Death Stranding. I played a little bit of it. And I was like, discouraged.
I'm not sold on the.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Andrew. Sorry, you can say it. Even if it's beeping loud, I'm still curious.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not sold on the population reduction thing, because people are a resource, and the resource grows in value when it's interconnected through the cooperation that you're talking about. I think the sum is definitely greater than the parts when there isn't trillions of dollars in infrastructure that is sort of intended to maintain this division to sort of crystallize our egos and keep us from really connecting at a human level, more so than like right now everyone it's very like survival, scarcity, all that stuff, which is manufactured, admittedly, because like abundance is more of the rule than the exception. It's just the way that everything is arranged is to benefit a small group of people, and it just so happens that the very foundation of the system that they built is at its core like creating energy from destruction, because there's such like all of the methods that we use to generate energy, there's so much loss. Like, it's really inefficient just from like an electrical point of view, a quantum point of view. When we're talking about energy, how much energy we're surrounded by, and how much we're limited by the very like small amount that we could even tap into and harness and use for sort of like materializing our thoughts and ideas. And once we break through that barrier of energy and the infrastructure built around the energy that we're invested in, then we'll really be able to start thinking in an interplanetary way, as some people like to put it.
I mean, there's like, I think throughout history, there's been rare cases of people breaking that barrier, but for them, it looks like, just meditating in a cave until they fuse with a tree or something. I mean, you could say like they just stopped playing, It sounds painful, just meditating for that long and sitting and fusing with a tree. Maybe
but
it's
it's painful because of nature. So, I mean, it becomes no longer painful if you sustain it. If you create a world where people can sit underneath, instead of the tree, let's say it's like underneath like the shade, and the shade could be like an air-conditioned pod. And then, you have access to food, you have access to resources. You're sitting there, you could be meditating by playing a video game like Death Stranding, right? And so it might be that we're headed towards a conscious evolution where everyone is really conveniently assisted towards meditating all the time. These are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. And it is really interesting that Marxism plays into that it's like Marxism is subverting evolution. It's subverting nature itself.
Well, when I say oscillationism, what I really mean is like hyper-capitalism and oscillating between that and Marxism, because this is just like a schizophrenic like prediction, but the idea is eventually we discover radical life extension, or maybe we realize we've already had it for like a little while. And that leads to like real global catastrophe where people just start fighting over it, and there's only 1% of the population left. Then the final 1% will go back to Marxism because they're like, yo, we gotta take care of our new immortal lives. Then they colonize space. Then they go back to hypercapitalism, which eventually oscillates back to Marxism eventually. And it goes back and forth, back and forth. The only problem is every time we shift, it gets quicker and more violent. And that's like something we can't necessarily sustain.
Is it not already Marxism or communism in a certain sense for the elite and scarcity capitalism for the rest? And the other question I have, does Marxism, because the only philosophy that's maybe remotely similar I'm familiar with is the technocracy movement from the 1930s, where I actually read their manual, and they made a big thing about actually reducing the amount of labor required. And while we technically know through all these statistics and technologies, we could already be there, what we have de facto is just, as we mentioned, 70% in the West living on some type of subsidy from the state, either directly through social services or indirectly through government subsidies for certain industries. But then what you have is a few, maybe 20%, 30% of individuals supposedly being the, how do you call them? In German, you say Leistungsträger. So the individuals that actually are paying into the system, they're actually creating value. And you have a huge swath of the population seemingly disconnected from that particular aspect of the economy and merely receiving transfer benefits, which seems woefully inefficient and also doesn't seem to make anyone happy, nor increase maybe social stability in the intermediate term, but long term, it also makes people lack a sense of purpose potentially and so on. So I'm just wondering, does Marxism even include this idea of reducing work? Because on some level, I would be very prone to what Andreas said, or sympathetic to the idea that we just have so many resources and availability of workforce and so on, that individuals just need to work less and we still can keep improving living standards. But somewhere, somehow, this doesn't seem to work out for everyone currently. Some things are missing in the system.
I mean, material stuff aside, like a big problem is people's failure to socialize, right? Because if you don't socialize, you don't actualize. And if you don't actualize, you're going to, for males at least, statistically proven, you go crazy. You either become like a psychopath, or, you know, if you successfully socialize, then you become like a Mozart. And then if you get ground down to something that's normal enough, that's palatable to upper middle class women, then you get to go to Ivy League or something.
Yeah, I think Marxism really talks about there's an essential amount of work, and so the amount of work that's essential becomes care. So the rest of the work we're experiencing, particularly in the 19th century, there was more work being done. You know, this is before the 45-hour work week or the 40-hour work week. The people were working all day long to their deaths, essentially, and it was exploitation of labor, right? So, like, exploitation of labor is the issue with Marxism. There can be maybe less labor if you get to a point where everything's achieved. And a big part of Das Kapital, or particularly Das Kapital, was that Marxism would happen probably in America in the beginning of the 21st century, or sometime in the 21st century, maybe 2020 to 2070, because all of these things from the Industrial Revolution would have to play through. And when the Industrial Revolution had, through capitalism, achieved all these innovations, we would be able to select which innovations we wanted to continue to sustain. And I would say, like, AI wasn't necessarily on the horizon, but automation certainly was. And so automation of these things made a lot of sense. Like, which things were we going to automate to keep running, which would reduce the amount of hours of labor, the amount of labor generally that would have to exist. And that definitely led to technocracy. I think technocracy comes out of the Marxist vision, right?
If we lived in
and I don't think that's even, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing, because you were talking about exploitation of the labor. It's like, if the people who are generating the labor are benefiting from the fruits of it, then they're not being exploited, and it's like a net positive, as opposed to just whoever like owns the company, being the prime benefactor of all of those various people's labors.
Okayo, we just got Stellium in here. That's awesome.
Hey guys, how's it going?
We're just talking about labor exploitation. A chill afternoon in Europe.
Yeah, I was listening to a bit before I hopped in. Interesting, the subject of manufactured scarcity. I find that one fascinating. The thing that I always come back to, looking at this realm, is that it's capable of handling probably 10 times as many people as we have currently. So I think that's all just narrative, ultimately. There's a document that I come back to a lot that, let's see, I'll put it in, there's a chat. Can I send a PDF in the chat, or is it just text?
URL link. If you link it to the PDF, you could also send it through Telegram or whatever to.
You can link it, you can send it, or on the bottom you can press present, and then you can share a document on your screen.
Yeah,
you
do that.
Okay,
Share,
I'll just
present.
do that real quick here. Share screen.
Yeah, because I was gonna while you're doing that, I was gonna say to Andrew, it seems like we have to be careful of this like ideological mask for new forms of exploitation, or the same form of exploitation, just through an ideological mask where we pretend that it's for a purpose. Then you get stuck in the animal farm. Here, I'm trying to share Stellium's screen. Oh, I have to remove my screen. My bad. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, this is something I came across a few years ago. Do you remember this, Andreas?
Can you Control Plus to make it a little bigger, or can you zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little larger?
Absolutely. So this is a researcher that discovered a man-made canal system that's in Africa, and it's right in this area of Africa, and it's actually much smaller than this little square that you see here. And you can see this on Google Earth, but these are perfectly parallel lines, and they're spaced a mile apart. And it becomes very obvious that this was an irrigation system, and it's on a massive delta of a river. And he started doing the math on it, which is in this PDF, where he's looking at how many acres were there and how much food can be grown per acre. And he came to the conclusion that roughly, I think it's 10 billion people could have been fed by this one small section of Africa. And I was going through this with Mike, 13th Monkey. He was looking at the area in far more detail, and saw that it was actually roughly double what this guy had calculated. So this one little section of Africa was probably capable of feeding about 20 billion people at some point in time. So when you see all of the repeated structures around the world, the star forts and the megalithic architecture and what we sometimes refer to as Tartaria, it's pretty obvious that there used to be a hell of a lot more people here. So this whole idea of population growth being something that, is out of control and we're going to kill ourselves if we don't find a way to limit it, I think that's all just...
Well, I definitely don't believe in overpopulation. I mean, either way, like I don't think we're gonna breed ourselves to death.
No, but it's maybe true. I think what we said earlier about depopulation is scarcity of labor.
Yeah. Right.
So scarcity of labor then makes a value for labor. And then if you do that, then you can maybe exploit the other way around. The laborer is able to exploit, or at very least the owner of the laborer, which seems to be the system that we have now, where Social Security, you have groups of taxation, which are saying, well, we own you, so you have to work. And then they're making this huge capital. And you can imagine how much money a CEO makes off of their employees, where their employees are getting paid $8 an hour. But then the CEO makes $100 million off of this, the bonuses and everything like that. That is probably about the ratio for these corporations and states, these states that have forced exploitation of laborers. And so if they can reduce the amount of potential labor out there, then they can actually make more money off of each laborer they have. Make America Green Again said something really interesting. As the machinery of the state gets more efficient to produce needs, we should all be able to and I think this is an alternative to lifelong careers, tithe and maybe spend a whole month annually, or maybe in your lifetime, a year or something. Like you might be able to do some community service for some period of time that is your job, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend your whole life working. It might be that everyone in their lifetime spends a small portion of their life, a very small portion of their life, focusing on doing something like local and global, we can say, but a cosmopolitan thing that actually benefits everyone, and propel like the Buckminster Fuller model, that all it takes is like one or two or three people to completely change the world, to provide resources that everyone can equally get more, like we can reach a gross surplus and escape that scarcity model.
That's what martial arts feels like to me, because it's not like something that I get ever get paid to do. But at this point, I'm teaching more than I'm learning, so I have to like show up for people. Basically, it's like it's kind of on me to like go there and to teach them swordsmanship, at least the basics, so that they could extend it and maybe become better people as a result. It's like, yo, I noticed I'm healthier. I noticed I have a better connection with my body, and I was like, great, maybe that's making the world a better place in its own subtle way.
I think that we build esteem through. Sorry, I think that we build esteem through esteemable acts, so that definitely tracks. And doing acts of service for your community is certainly a great way to build esteem in oneself. We just wrapped up the first month of this bicycle food drive that we're doing out here, and we were able to get 700 meals to hungry families in our town. Just by gamifying a food drive with like 5 different teams, all seeing who could get more points than the other one. And we're going to be partnering with a local nonprofit to try to get some material support from some people who can provide it, whether they're like wholesale food distributors or like grocery stores and things like that. Using the nonprofit's letterhead is going to open up a lot of doors for us to kind of like scale and expand what we did this past month. I wanted to touch on what you were saying about technocracy sort of becoming developing communism because of the way that like labor and ownership would have like an inverse relationship to what they have now. And I think my theory is that, you know, they read Das Capital and they're like, oh, capitalism turns people into automatons. Well, why don't we just replace people with automatons? And like they're making a lot of they're making leaps towards that goal if the goal is to replace labor with machines that they don't have to pay.
So you see it as a problem, like in general, that labor is something that should be protected almost.
Yeah.
I mean, I think exploitation and the ideas that work into that, like that's what needs to change, because whether they're exploiting people or exploiting
Land,
you know, a digital consciousness, yeah, that too, you know, it's all and it's just everything is just so inefficient because of profit motive, and it's I don't know, it's just really frustrating and ridiculous.
I mean, even
but,
even with the population thing, I pretty much agreed with Raph. He was like, there could have been a better way to do it. And I was like, absolutely. It's not that I'm concerned with like the number of people. It's just who is pulling the levers. You know, it's like who the people that are actually exploitative, that are behind it, that are responsible for the population growth. So it's like, it's almost like they own us, you know, from like inception to death. And we're just, again, like someone said, farmed for labor. And I was like, yeah, sometimes I do feel like I was farmed for labor by some invisible corporate entity that just said, yeah, you should exist to work.
Make America green again. Go ahead. Sorry. I'll go back.
I just wanted to say that if like, even if we didn't live in the system that we lived in, I still would be reproducing. And if the system was different, I would just have a different relationship with my community. That's all.
I was going to quickly show this because Make America Green Again brought up that Burkina Faso had these essential issues with their dire, the falling apart dams that they had. And so actually they've done an amazing work building and rebuilding their 1,500 dams that are sand dams, simple and effective. And this changes everything, because if you go to a place that's become a desert because of environmental myopic corporatism where they've completely destroyed everything in the environment. Everything turns into a desert. And when people think of Africa, they think of a desert for some reason. But this is literally from 2018 to 2025. You're seeing parts of West Africa turn back into ecosystems. And these ecosystems will allow for things to evolve really rapidly. And it's amazing how quickly this can be done with the help of humanity. We're able to very quickly build up a sustainable opportunity, an opportunity for rapid evolution. And evolution is kind of a dirty word these days, but really, I think all it means is like choice-based progress, that we're able to decide what we're going to become and self-realize. So there's no reason for us to be looking at a world and saying there's no opportunity, because we're the thing that makes the opportunity. And that tends to be what people say about capitalism. Capitalism is the making of opportunity, but that's what globalism, the issues with trade, are like, where we said this earlier in the last show, that 2 or 3 times the cost of the resources and the labor are going into the exchange or the travel between locations. And
That's completely insane.
And it could be fixed. I think that's something that you could use sailboats, you
Totally.
could use gliders. Like there's electric gliders right now that Facebook owns. And they did literally so they could figure out how to bring Facebook to India, you know? And it's amazing how powerful Facebook is in destabilizing a democracy or changing the way people vote or the way people perceive the world in Madagascar, or, you know, whatever they want to do to affect the Arab Spring. But they're inventing more and more efficient ways with less and less entropy to do that. And we get to a point where it's all about risk assessment, because the risk is that the entire system can collapse at any minute, that the lobsters will boil in the sea. I think that really is the question, is how long can you sustain a system before it collapses, especially if there's no incentive to keep it going after they've already interfered with an election.
So just because you brought up Burkina Faso, I sent a link in the private chat about a guy visiting there. You know, Burkina Faso recently was taken over by Ibrahim Traore, who is apparently quite an interesting individual. Once again, apparently the bottom and the top working together in this particular case. One of the things I found interesting is what he introduced is, if you have a traffic offense, you have to do community labor, even as a tourist. So if you do a traffic offense, you have to clean the streets and things like that. And he's apparently reforming the state, on the one hand, to stop the previous colonialization, like actually taking charge of natural resources. He's invited Russia, which is an open question, you know, how that exactly will pan out. But it seems that their rapid development was also only made possible because they were so exploited, or they were so downtrodden, in a sense. This is what it appears to me from far away in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely, I'm going to say amazing. I shouldn't say fantastic, because that would bother some people, but it's pretty amazing what's going on in Burkina Faso. And I mean, I think these are solutions based on exactly what we're talking about. Labor can be, but this is also a concern, because how close is that to, you know, when forced labor for a traffic violation in Africa? I mean, it's pretty easy to get in a traffic violation in Africa, the way the road systems work. So you could imagine this being misused or exploited in the worst way, where all of a sudden people, and how efficient is that? Because let's say you're a tourist and you have more money, can you just pay? Because someone might not, what kind of labor can you do that's as valuable as paying someone in American dollars? It's probably more valuable just to pay your fine if you're an American tourist. So do they allow that, or do they really want you to go out onto the street and do some sort of physical labor that you might not be capable of or efficient at?
I mean, I know of like a few even small companies that like to outsource too, specifically to people living in countries like this. Like, hey, you got a laptop, you got internet, all right,
Totally.
just call this list of people, read this script, and if they get a bite, send them over my way, and they'll pay and like the people in the statesides will pay them like not much money, but for them it's like life-changing money, like $300 a month for them in American dollars, just wired over instantly. They're like, what? I could get my own place.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing too. Like, are we taking away, because for a long time, the uplifting of the rest of the world relied on the gross surplus that the West had, right? Because we had so much money that you could literally just spend a few $100s and you could save someone's life. And that was a very useful thing in certain circumstances. I think that's one of the reasons why neoconservatives were so keen on Marxist uplifting of Marxist countries like China, capitalism in China, because what's the solution to poor people in China? Well, capitalism. It brings in the consumers, the money, it's through labor. Labor then is supplied. They in exchange get an uplift in a new infrastructure. Infrastructure rises, and at a certain point, there's equalization. I mean, this seems like a plan that came not out of Mao, but out of the neoconservative Republicans in the West, right? But then that only lasts for so long, and we get to the point today where we can't afford that. They have only so many resources. We don't live in a world where there's a surplus of resources the way there used to be. And it's crazy to come out of the 90s because, like, you can think about America in the 1990s where, 1/5 of the world's population had 95% of all of the world's resources, essentially, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and before the rise of New China. And things were pretty cool for the colonial powers, but that's not what things are like now. And how long can that be sustained? That's why people keep saying we need
The
to build
oceans
and
are
make
going to
things less.
boil. The lobsters will die. Okay. There's no stopping it.
That's the soundbite. I'm pretty sure that's it. But then what do you replace it with? Because, at some point then it's not going to take 1 billion years or 3 billion years to come up with a new lobster. You can overnight have your wish come true. That's what the singularity is all about. So what are we replacing the cold and sterile biology that we've lived up with, the systems that we've had in the past? What are we replacing it with? What are the values that we're trying to exchange and keep?
All signs point to spirituality. Maybe it's New Age nonsense. Maybe it's the Orthodox Church, but it's definitely something spiritual.
Please God, no. But yeah, I mean, maybe in a Christian samurai approach, like, do you see like a quickening of evolution towards Christian virtues, or
God, I hope not. I hope that we could do a little better than that. Maybe something a little more universal, accessible, not so much guilt based, or shame based for that matter. I think we're kind of like over that, right?
what do you guys think? Is shame? I mean, we're in the internet, and the
I like
internet loves
gratitude.
shame based.
I like gratitude. I think me. I'm all about that gratitude. In the worst of times, in the best of times, gratitude cannot steer you wrong. I don't think so. Like, I don't think there's anything really bad coming from just being thankful first and using that as a very simple yet sturdy foundation to build everything else off of. Even philosophically, you could like weave a bunch of complicated stuff off of it. Like, yeah, you should be grateful to be alive. You don't have to be,
What do you guys think? Both about gratitude and shame, because do you agree that shame is overrated by our current neckbeard internet trolls? I mean, who say that shame, a lot of people love shame culture and they think we need more shame culture. Do you
Isn't
agree
there some kind of divide between shame and guilt in the West and the
Yes.
East or something like
Yes.
that?
Totally.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, right in the Middle East, it's where your Jewish grandmother comes from. It's the shame and guilt complex. But no, I mean, really, what do you guys think about guilt and shame? Elaborate. Like, what is it? And I agree with Chris that shame is kind of a waste, but say it.
I think that if you harbor the shame or the guilt and romanticize it and identify with it, as opposed to just sort of like accepting accountability, growing from the experience that caused you shame, and changing what you need to about either yourself or your surroundings in order to prevent that from happening, then you can move forward, and you're not like just wallowing, because yeah, there is no value in the wallowing. But if you can turn that shame, which comes from doing something that you know is wrong and feeling the consequences of it, seeing the consequences happening to another person, yeah, if you can get over that trauma and stop being a big baby, then yeah, sure, like it can be a catalyst for growth, but only if you're willing to do the work.
You can't underestimate that catalyst that you're talking about, though. Like, if you really investigate and inquire your shame and your guilt, why am I feeling guilty? Why am I feeling ashamed? And you really break that down, and you could successfully transmute that into something positive. And like you said, that kind of triggers a growth of some sort. I think if you do that once, that's like really an enlightening moment. I mean, it's kind of like what they say, like, if you see the path in one thing, you'll see the path in everything, truly. So it's like, I don't think you should underestimate that in itself is enough to like really evolve a person, probably. If you all you have to do is just investigate. It's self-inquiry. It's why are you ashamed? Why are you guilty?
See, because I think Aaron's right that shame is actually a system of control, and it's a societal control. It's not so often I mean, guilt might be an individual mechanism, but shame seems to be a social control. And it might be that shame is valuable to the society because shame enforces norms by signaling moral or social failure, right? But internalized guilt is related probably more to gratitude, guilt and gratitude versus shame and accolade, right? Or whatever we call it, applause, accolade, where people are given a trophy or a medal. I remember one time I was in school and they offered, I was in trouble for some reason in like second grade, and I had to clean the lunch trays, right? But then I decided I really liked cleaning the lunch trays, and it was something to do, and I didn't want to play football or something. So during free recesses, I would just go and help clean the lunch trays anyway, because I liked the lunch ladies, and you got like a free piece of pizza anyway. It was like chocolate milk and free pizza. I mean, and it's in the shade. I don't have to be in the heat all the time. Seems like a good deal. And eventually they gave me some sort of a social reward. They're like, most beneficial, like volunteer or something, because I was cleaning the same ones that they were giving me a punishment for. Now it becomes a reward mechanism. So at that point, it felt really awkward and weird. And I think that was the end of it. I got some gummy bears as the reward, like those sour worm things with the salt on the sugar. And I hate junk food. I'm not
It's
like
programming.
big into candy. So I just was like, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
You
know how many
because of the reward.
parenting and teaching handbooks literally tell you got to come up with a system of reward and punishment. Like you got to reward good behavior, you got to sternly shame bad behavior, and it's just this is just told to us. Before I have a kid, how should I raise my kid? I never raised a kid before.
But the same mechanisms of punishment become the reward when we're older, right? Like getting to go to bed early is something I like long for. And don't even talk to me about the people who like to be spanked. But there is, I think, kind of a contrary between the dynamic between a reward and punishment it's based on your own interpretation. So I don't know if I agree that shame is so valuable unless you're really trying to keep that lobster. Shame is for sustaining lobsters until the sea boils. That's what I feel like about shame.
I'll add something about it. So have you heard of David Hawkins' Power versus Force? It's a book written by this doctor, and he basically used muscle testing as a way of determining the energetic value of different emotions. And if you do a search for just David Hawkins shame, an image search, you'll see this. That's the book. The energetic levels of guilt and shame are right there at the very bottom.
Is this it?
Yeah. So, and a lot of people would expect love to be at the top, but, peace, joy, those rate even higher than love. So. But it's negative reinforcement, right? And you can learn that way, but typically it doesn't make you a better person. You're just kind of avoiding the pain and the suffering and doing what you are supposed to do, but not necessarily because you're feeling inwardly driven to do it.
So then,
I think shame,
go ahead.
Just as a teaching mechanism. Socially, to sort of like conform to social norms. I think there should be like a distinction between people who are shamed for doing something that they don't know is wrong and people who are doing something that they do know is like objectively wrong. Like I've got a 2-year-old is always trying to get into stuff, has started just like putting random items in the toilet, which she knows is wrong, and then it's just like we don't know how to. The best that we can figure out how to do is just like telling her not to do it, and she knows not to do it. It's not like you can give her an example of like, oh, here's what you should do instead of throwing a car into the toilet. Don't
give her her favorite thing, make her really love a thing, make her feel like it's super precious and important, and then when she does it, it's lost forever, and like kind of give a funeral for that thing that we'll never get it back, and it's lost forever.
Well, isn't that still a form of like punishment and like shaming?
You don't have to shame her at all. It's maybe psychological manipulation still, but you're not shaming her. You're just making it evident that this thing is lost forever, and it's essentially dead. It's something that she can never interact with again. She can never play with again. You're not blaming her for it, but you're just making it clear the consequences of this thing being lost forever.
So it's
Mike's
not teaching
Mike's
cause
an
and
actual
effect.
father, you might know.
This isn't just theory, and I did way too much guilt and shaming with my kids. So my son, he suffered a lot because, I just should have read books on parenting instead of just doing it.
It's weird because they don't give you, they don't make you get a license for having kids. You get like a license to drive, a license to shoot ducks, but I feel like they could make it a little easier on the kids if there was some sort of a training course. You got 9 months there that they could really offer, especially if you have some incentive. So the benefit of having better citizens is more tax dollars. It's not like a great system, but it's what we have. If you have a bunch of people getting aborted, then you have less taxpayers. So you think even by that alone, most states would incentivize more taxpayers by prohibiting abortion. Beyond that, if you have citizens that are insane because they had bad parenting, then they're going to be a cost on the healthcare system. So it would be something you would de-incentivize having insane people. This is the lobster again. But if you're trying to have better paid taxpayer workers, then it's part of education. You want to refine your resources. We talked about earlier. If the state takes their persons and turns them into doctors, lawyers, and scientists and engineers and makes them healthy people, then 40 or 50% of their salary is, it's $500,000 for some kinds of people. It's a lot more money that the state can make off of these people. So it benefits them to have healthier persons.
But wouldn't you say that treating those people and there being so many jobs in the treatment of a lack of health kind of has more value almost?
If you own a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you talk about it's a cost. It's a cost to this, and there's how much is this who's getting paid? Someone's getting paid, and I think that that person being a functional member of society paying taxes, they might even be more valuable being a sick, trainable, easily manipulated person.
Client.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a value to clientele, but I think also the value of there's got to be a formula there, and the value of clientele is dependent on how big of a market you need to saturate and what the effects of having that market are on the rest of the economy. So it might be true that having a drugged out populace is valuable to a few people that run a few of these pharmaceutical corporations, but there's an extensive history of new markets being built. So we can't anticipate what inventions are going to happen, particularly from the technological revolution. I don't think anyone could have predicted, or maybe that's the wrong way to put this, but less people predicted how rapidly the technological revolution would unfold, because the industrial revolution took a century. So for the technological revolution to take a decade or 2 decades was just really, this is that telescopic nature of evolution. Things are going faster and faster, and the service economy as well. So we have no idea how much service economy could replace it. And right now, the amount of people that they need to bring Amazon trucks, like we were saying, that was, I think, unanticipated, that we'd have to have so many people bringing things back and forth because people aren't going to the store anymore. It used to be that billions of people would be driving every day, and now they can sit at home because millions of people can bring them packages, right? And then that's only for a few years, because very quickly we're going to see Uber transcend into Waymo, and there's going to be more drones doing all those deliveries. So the service economy is going to replace the amount of workers that we have. So the next step is to figure out what kind of innovation can happen.
There's a simple formula for this. It's misery equals money.
Misery equals money. That's probably true. But okay, well, back to what you just said. Alpha suffering at the base. What's the antithesis of the, what is the omega to the alpha, the ultimate consciousness? Like, what's really the point of this model here? And
Yeah, I can't answer that question.
you
You can,
Well, I
you
mean,
can-
all right.
you can
Let,
extrapolate.
I think this is the way you could practically apply it. Is everyone feels this whole spectrum of emotions, right? And you go through it. And wait, can you pull up the chart again?
Yeah, let's do it. Hold on.
So it's like you start at the very bottom because, like, you know, when you're around like the fear area, and that's basically to what preserve ego. So it's like it's like what's holding that shit? Like what's making you feel ashamed? And then if you could release that, then you go on to guilt. What's making me feel guilty? What's making me feel apathetic? What makes me not give a shit? What am I what's my biggest grievance in life? Like did I lose my loved one or something? And then it goes into fear, and then you just go through all the negative spectrums, and then eventually you start touching the positive end, and I guess you vibrate at a higher frequency. At least that's how like unblocking your chakra works. Like some similar process. Again, it's all self-inquiry. It's like what's causing this stuff in you.
Well, some of those negative ones are beneficial in the sense that, like a child, you teach a child to be fearful of the hot plate on the stove. You know, I mean, you can let them get a 3rd-degree burn by putting their hand on it, and let them figure it out themselves, or you can try and scare them into realizing, hey, this thing is really dangerous, and you don't want to do this. You don't want to have to learn by experience. You can learn.
Can't you just mitigate? So for me, I burned my hand, of course, because I wasn't going to listen to some idiot who thinks they're smart just because they've been on this playing this game longer than I have, right? Like that's not how that works. But
Sound like
I
my
think,
son.
exactly. But if you were to put a maybe like a limit on the suffering, so maybe the temperature isn't 500 or 1,000 degrees, but it's maybe 150 degrees. Maybe you can set it up so that they experience just a certain amount of suffering and pain. It's like, well, you wanted to know, and here now this is what happens when you touch that thing, is it burns.
I want to put like maybe it's the other way around. Maybe a child is already born in omega consciousness, and it's as they live their life, they start accumulating all this life baggage, which brings them lower and lower into the spectrum. Like
Grounding.
it's easy for a child to feel at peace and at joy and at love. They don't know shit.
That's what you mean when you say you're grounded. That's what that's actually about.
Yeah. So then once they learn more about the world, learn more about themselves, their insecurities, then they get dragged lower and lower and lower. That's just the natural course of becoming an adult, right? And then once you get to such a low depth, it's like you're literally burdened with the weight of the world. How do you get over that? Because you can't live like that. If you try to live like that in that like lower spectrum, you're just going to be miserable your whole life. And that's what they want you to be. They want you to be in the lowest end of the spectrum, miserable, ashamed, guilty, whatever. So you can try to buy every solution that's available to you. But it's like if you could do the self-inquiry and then go back to that state of the omega consciousness, basically like being a child again, except with the wisdom of life, like with the wisdom of adult living. Can you reconcile the two, find acceptance?
And as this chart shows, with contracted and expanded consciousness, this may even somewhat relate to what David Icke spoke about in terms of perception, right? Increase your perception, you increase your options, you increase your, I want to say love for some reason. But ultimately, also just like you said, Chris, it's just not comfortable to remain within these lower states, even though they may serve a function. But I would claim they're certainly here to be transmuted. Because if not, then you're easily controlled by anyone on any higher rung of the ladder, even if it's just marginally, because it appears that quite a few of the supposed elites, at least those we see, they don't necessarily seem particularly happy, but they are in a high enough frequency to be able to control others who have even less awareness or are stuck in even lower frequency bandwidth of these emotions.
Let me just answer a super chat really quickly. Chan says, Andreas, please debate Jade Dyer. Your two worldviews would clash perfectly. Ironically,
that's the orthodox train.
Yeah, so this cuck who I tried to talk to, who has the IQ of a lobster, actually, I tried to talk to him, and he blocked me. So I guess he's afraid and kind of a little bitch. And I'll be honest, I'm not really like that worried about it. But if you want to reach out to him and try to get him to debate me, I will wipe the floor with his fucking face, just so you know. Sorry. I mean, I've watched some of his lectures because people told me to. And the idiot doesn't know anything about theology, religion, etymology, or history. And he's actually at this point trying to pretend that, that Catholics and Islamics believe in a different God than him. I think that's true because he believes in some sort of a Jabalan Masonic demon, some sort of triune demiurge. And yeah, good for him and his pedophile religion. But I'm pretty embarrassed for anyone who's associated with that fool. It's really sad. I said it, and I'm sorry.
We forgive you.
Thank you. All right, cool.
So yeah, consciousness. Let's go back. Let's go back to the Omega consciousness, guys. Let's all find our own way there, and we just report on each other's like progress. This is what I did. I took this route, and I ended up at a dead end, and now I'm stuck forever.
I like the idea of the map of consciousness being used to justify social hierarchies.
I would
it's
like
an
to think
interesting
that
idea. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, doesn't a lot of the wisdom of age come from some kind of suffering? I mean, I know that when I was like 3, 4 years old, I was pretty dumb, like I smashed my fingers in a door because I thought they would like get all like big and red and like pulsating like in the cartoons and stuff. Didn't happen, just turned purple and hurt a lot for a few days, probably broke some fingers, I don't know. And like, after I saw Aladdin in theaters, I tried to take, one of my baby blankets and like jump off a play structure and fly like fucking Aladdin. That didn't work out, probably because it wasn't a carpet and it wasn't magic. But
For me,
those
it
are
was
some
Mary
pretty-
Poppins and the umbrella.
the umbrella. Yeah,
I just want to say, as you get older, like maybe the circumstances don't change, but the frame that you put around them changes. So you start to look at the same experience through different eyes, and you have a different thought process and approach about it. Just because you've understood that you don't have to look at it a particular way.
yeah, no, I agree. I think a big part of being human is sort of like testing our limitations, and some limitations are a little bit more need a little bit more engineering to test than others. Humans are capable of flight, but it takes a lot more than a blanket and a play structure, and there really is no point in slamming your hand in a door. But I understand like why cartoonists animated that feeling in that way. It's like, because in your mind's eye it does feel that way. It doesn't become like this giant swollen pulsating like digit. But yeah, no, I agree.
Well, I keep thinking about, I think it's interesting that you brought up David Hawkins and this idea that maybe we are, that's a big answer to me in a lot of ways. The alternative of shame and fear, because people are afraid to step outside of their boundaries, and we're trained that way because fire burns you and you should be afraid and you should normalize and everything. But that doesn't allow us to evolve, and we need to rapidly evolve because we can't expect developing conditions and new conditions that are constantly emerging. And this is like, I guess, the father's thing, like Stellium, you're a dad. So the world that you came out of is already transitory because it's not the world your father came out of. And you were already, for those who don't know, he's like the first arrested hacker in the world, right? Like the Microsoft, he's a kid in the back of a dumpster, more or less. Come on.
First to be jailed.
Fair enough. But like, imagine a kid in the back of a dumpster going through modem dialing numbers. That was pretty new in the 80s, I guess is the point. And you're a bit, you're kind of in between, like Doc Brown with the two electrical cables connecting the lightning from the past to the future. And your kid, you can only kind of give them so much of a, you're like, well, this is what it was like when I was a kid. But that world's dead now. Like the world is not the world that I grew up in is dead now. So what do we even?
Very much so. I had to work jobs to earn money so I could play video games or steal. And nowadays it's all just on tap. Unending. So
but now they can farm your son's
nothing
data.
You have to do to get the dopamine hit.
But they're stealing your son's data. So because data, and we talked about this earlier in terms of Marxism, that labor isn't the only value, abstraction is. And so they're studying your son, they're studying the data so they can figure out how to predict. Because this is the same issue that they have. It's the same as ours. Where is the future going? It probably even matters more to a philosopher king or a corporation because they're worried about losing what they have. So they're trying to figure out where they can pivot to next. So they're studying us and then studying our kids so that they can know what the next preconceived reality will develop and evolve into. And yeah, they're doing whatever they have to. They're investing however they can. They're creating games things for our amusement, masturbatory as they might seem, so that they can study us, so they can, I mean, that's really a weird trap that your son's been put inside, and everyone else's as well. Like any game that we're playing, they have all of the gamification. This is exactly what Andrew Vega was talking about earlier with his food drive. Gamification is an incentive for people to do what they don't even think of as work, right? It's a kind of labor that we're not even aware that we're contributing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add something about the Hawkins scale, because a lot of people take that as a fact, and I don't. I think it's an interesting concept, and it's maybe a roadmap, but muscle testing, which is the way that was, where he came up with those numbers, it's a very subjective thing, and you can influence the outcome of the test based, subconsciously as the person doing the testing, and there are all kinds of factors that play in. So I don't think of that as set in stone by any means, but I think it's an interesting way of looking at the energy of emotion.
Well, it seems like shame is very narrow, and that actually is shown up in this map, so I kind of agree with it. Shame is extremely narrow. It pinpoints. And then this idea of this omega is something really broad, because many things can happen in many different directions. So
yeah, shame is the finger point, right?
Mm-hmm. It kind of is. And then like you can become whatever you want, which is, I think, also scary in and of itself. Maybe that's what the 90s were all about, was training people, like kids, to say you can do whatever you want, so you can choose to do nothing, right? And that's kind of dangerous too. An entire generation that's designed to just be a consumer.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a guy going, haha, nothing matters, versus the guys like sad saying, oh, nothing matters. Both seem a little unhealthy, taken to an extreme.
Institutionalized entitlement.
Yeah, that too.
Well, so if humanity can subvert natural selection, how is it? And like, what do you think? Should we do it? Should we be trying to subvert natural selection, like I've been bringing up, or do you think we should be really just going with it?
Maybe we're not ready for that yet. Maybe we're not ready to let go of the baby cradle crib of natural selection frameworks.
Telescopic nature of evolution. Let me go back to let's do models again, because I think visualizations are helping us here.
So the Darwin Awards, they still have a value?
Maybe for a minute. See, that's where can I find like something that says telescopic nature of evolution? I want to see a picture of it. I mean, just this idea that things took a long time and then they take less time. We said this at the beginning, like billions of years of evolution, millions of years of evolution, maybe. I don't know. Okay, I know you're going to give me that. How about at least how about just civilization then? So civilization took a long time, and then the technological revolution is a quicker period of time than the industrial revolution.
We may want to look at in terms of civilizational development. Again, this is just a model and a framework. I just posted it in private chat. Ken Wilber's spiral dynamics. At least when I first heard about it, I was quite fascinated by it. And I think there is something to it, even if the timeline or whatever is off, in terms of states of consciousness, and especially the switch that he calls a tier 1 to a tier 2 consciousness. There's better images, I think, than this more expanded ones with more detail and more descriptions. Let me see. I'm picking up an image for you.
I love this. I love the spiral dynamics model.
The one right there in the middle. No, to the
I
left.
sent another one.
I don't know. Before you explain it, I also want to point out that this also applies to like the as above, so below principle, where it's like if this reflects in the individual, then it's also inevitably going to reflect in like the masses as to where we're at in our spiral journey or whatever. So what are we looking at, Raph?
Well, are you familiar with this idea or not? So this is basically, I learned about this 15 years ago or whatever. This is just a concept in terms of how civilizations develop, also correlated with history, which may or may not be correct, but maybe that doesn't matter too much. What I find highly interesting is you have, so on the bottom, it says instinctive self is like the base things, magic. Power self is like root chakra. Role self is states. And interestingly enough, orange is then corporations and maybe mercantilism. This always makes me think of, they call Trump the orange man. Maybe he's somehow representative of that idea. The green would literally be Green Party, where then you want to share everything again with everyone. But the issue here is, you always, with these lower ones, you always have a wound, let's say. For the green one, for example, it is the, I want to say, lack of boundaries, because you want to share with anyone and everyone. But then, of course, the coherence cannot properly created within a system. And then when you move up even further, that's the tier 2 systems, the integral self and then the holistic self, which would be this combination of as above, so below, or as within, so without, to actually have an integrated presence within yourself, whilst not being egotistical or narcissistic. And this would be the ideal state of consciousness, at least within this framework, to create a peaceful and efficient and loving type of civilization.
Interesting.
Where do you think we're at right now as a collective species? Like, do you think we're more in the yellow or the green or the somewhere in the upper quadrant? I think. I mean, there's probably a higher quadrant than this. We just can't conceive of it, but maybe we're like about to go through shifts.
It'd be interesting if one could determine that on a basis of cultures or states currently. So we still have states as a system. So the blue would be there, the rule self. They talk about the rules-based New World Order, I want to say, but what do they call it? Rules-based system. Isn't Putin always talking about this? We need a rules-based society. And even before, I think George Bush and so on, you know, the rule of the law, not the rule of the jungle. And then the orange would be the entrepreneurship, and green, like I said, you know, Green Party integration. But we can even, you see, you have some details on it in terms of which color or which aspect refers to which qualities. It'd be hard for me to tell where we are. I think it varies greatly. Maybe for the West, somewhere between from the red to the green. Yeah, let's say in that spectrum.
I feel like it's parallel to like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because if your needs aren't really met at the most fundamental level, then you're probably going to be on a lower quadrant of the spiral. So as collectively we move further into material abundance, that's going to free up our consciousness, I guess, to start getting all integral and holistic.
That would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah, would be.
Right. I think that maybe you could say that in places like Europe, right, like the social democracies, that's kind of the affect that they're saying about green, is that the social democracies are working to sustain without the maybe emphasis on the rational self. But maybe there's not an integral self yet. There's a lot of effort towards an integral self, which is something uniting the bottom three: sensitive, rational, and rule.
And interestingly here, the second quadrant, so the tier 2, would be without, I guess, fear, or it's like there's a relevant transition here where basically just the example we gave earlier with education or raising a child, you would not be so beholden anymore to the negative reinforcement mechanisms, because you would be self-aware enough to kind of steer yourself in a different way, the way I understand it. But Stellium, are you familiar with these ideas?
Yeah, vaguely, but I think it's interesting that it's basically a reverse of the cone that we were looking at before. When you think about the distribution of population and who reaches that upper portion, it's the smallest segment of people, right? And most people are in that lower physiological breathing, food, water, sex, sleep state where it's survival, you know. So it's as you get up towards self-actualization, then you get into things like creativity and all of these other things. So it's yeah, that's just my take on it.
Grandma Talk says that materialists are less spiritual in general. Is that true? I think we brought up this idea earlier that materialists love virtual and virtual is spiritual. Do you guys agree or disagree? I kind of pushed this idea, but I didn't ask whether you thought it was true or not.
Virtual
like
is spiritual. How so?
Spirituality versus virtuality. You know, the simulation theorists like Elon Musk and everything, they're trying to compensate for the lack of spirituality by creating something that they imagine to be not material but conceptual. And so that conceptual reality is a virtual reality, and a virtual reality is maybe a spiritual reality through the eyes of a materialist.
I think a materialist is a spiritualist who hasn't gone enough extremes with the materialism, because once you reach that extreme, you're going to be like, nothing means anything anymore. If you have like billions of dollars, like what the hell am I even doing? Like, what is my life about? I don't have to work for anything. Like, what do I want to do? Who am I? Like,
hey, you see that a lot with these world's billionaires today.
What's that quote about the scientists that start off as materialists and then they get further and further into it, and at the bottom of the cup is spirituality, is God. They're like I see the materialism and atheism and these sorts of things as really kind of lower levels of intellectuality. They haven't really seen the patterns that are at play in reality.
And maybe this needs to be adjusted for inflation, but I recently saw this idea again that supposedly, at least for the West, if you would earn about $60,000, of course it's kind of non-specific, but around that range, any more materiality that you could siphon off of the system or work for or generate would not significantly improve your inner sense of peace or well-being any further. So, maybe that's something to aim for, that everyone could get that level of material comfort, so they actually have the capacity and the willingness and the time and the energy.
Are you advocating for UBI, Raphael?
Well, not necessarily, but for some type of system that enables that through whatever way, shape, or form, that just this living standard basis is given to everyone. Because what we still often forget in the West, I think, where most of us, all of us are, and probably most in chat, is that people, of course, in many places still pretty much live in the dirt. However, still, they're astoundingly happy oftentimes. So it's insane. Or just, as you know, the beggar, still he's a beggar, but still you come for a visit and he's somehow able to give you a whole buffet of things because he's putting forward that energy and that effort and that attention, which someone on the other side who's very rich may not even offer you a glass of water, depending on their mindset, right?
When I was in the States recently and went to Costco, I didn't detect a high degree of fulfillment in the cross section.
You didn't
really
find
Costco?
You didn't find bliss in Costco? I find bliss in every Costco I ever visit. I'm actually a big Costco person. You go to Costco and like there's all these people
you took your bliss in with you.
Yeah, that might be true. But I mean, you'll see that a lot of people at Costco that don't have bliss. You're right. And they're stressed out and they're spending $500 and they're getting things they don't really need. And it's because they're going through the first stages of the Costco. But if you go in a Costco and you just run right to the back, and you don't even do any, you just go straight to the back, you can get your $4.99 chicken.
Veggie section.
The veggies and the chicken, but they're both like the most expensive things that are the cheapest things, like the most valuable things that they're selling at a loss, because they know that most people are buying all this crap in the front of the store. So the stuff that's like, the vegetables, which are like high grade organics and things like that, for sure. I think in Camarillo, I recently went, they had every kind of thing, like platanos, poblano peppers, all these beautiful things. And it was like $4 for like 20 poblano peppers, right? And it was amazing. And you can get your hot dog for $1.50 if you're into that. But the point is that Costco does have a lot of bliss if you know how to live that lifestyle. Generally, though, yeah, it's what you make of it. Everything's what you make of it.
I'm getting the overall goal to be sustainable feelings of abundance. Like, can you make yourself feel abundant? And is it sustainable? Like, some people may feel abundant, even if their life is falling apart. Some people may have everything and their life just feels like, I never have enough. I don't have enough. So how do you sustain abundance?
Inside of Stellium, there are 2 wolves, but inside of me, there's $1.50 Costco hot dog, right? Angela Baby Carson says, please tell people to follow me. I just wanted to do this solid and say, yeah.
And also to give a shout out.
Where are you going?
It's one of the, that's a good question. One of the individuals that's like, not sure what's the most positive term to use, bumblebee or butterfly, and all kinds of interesting channels. You can see ABC chatting. So it's good.
ABC
as well. Very cool.
ABC.
That's a good way to remember you. Angela Baby Carson, ABC. Very good. What do you think about humanity engineering altruistic values, though? I mean, because we have all of these values that we've used. Religion has offered us these values. You were kind of worried about Christianity from a Nietzschean perspective, that modern Christianity isn't anything that Christ lived for, right? That's a big issue with the J guys thing, is that you've got this apostasy created by homosexual pedophile Satanists used to drink the blood of heretics. And this is supposed to be related to what Jesus was doing in his lifetime. I mean, we create this idea and this foundation of what we want to learn and what we want to force. And so what's a big part of Christians? I mean, there's a value to it because Christianity for a while was evolving people quicker at religion in general than natural evolution. Something that might take a lot longer in time, maybe only takes 1,000 years to get a bunch of people to all radicalize. Islam is probably even more efficient than Christianity at this because they use shame so much more efficiently than even the Orthodox do. They'll kill you in certain places in the world if you don't do this, if you don't follow this order. But Christianity produced this search for altruism and truth. Islam did too, by the way. They don't like to hear that. But this idea of truth led to science and to academic pursuits of abstract truth. And something that if you're looking for God and God is truth, then eventually you replace this idea of God with a more high resolution truth. And maybe God's not a single parent who writes books. Maybe truth is something a bit more nuanced than that. And that kind of gets rid of the shell. So the lobster might bring us to this place where we don't need the shell anymore. That might be the truth about these altruistic values that we had from myths and from religion, but we're at a place where we can create new altruistic values and priorities. Do you think we should continue to do that? Like, should we try to imprint kids with some sort of a new mythos? Like, should we be creating a new religion? Is simulation theory that? Like, is it bad? Should we stop ourselves from engineering altruistic values?
I think altruistic values are great, just if you also teach them not to let themselves be exploited by individuals who are not altruistic at all.
Well, like, what should those values be, right?
Yeah, altruism can be hijacked also for narratives and agendas, right? And you see this with the environmental movement as
with science too.
I think personally, I think the most altruistic thing you could do as an individual, going back to like what we're really in control of, I think like the better you're able to go back into your family curses, your generational traumas and fix that, you'll just show up better in the world. And that's like better for everyone ultimately. Even your own family, you know, like if you had kids and you managed to fix your like inherited baggage from like your dad or your dad's dad, and you just said, this ends with me. I think that's like the most altruistic thing you could do, right? That can't be exploited. You're just fixing your own potholes in your family line road.
So what about, okay, so compassion, truth, justice, humility, cooperation. Are these good? Should we be trying to engineer altruistic values of compassion, truth, justice, humility, and cooperation?
Sure. I can't think of a better thing. Like you're the smartest guy in the room right now.
No,
so, yeah.
I'm just saying, like, does that make sense or is that wrong?
Sounds good to me, man.
I'm devil's advocate.
Defer to Exertus.
I don't know if I agree with myself. How about that? You know, because I think humility is, you know, these are kind of virtues that come from cardinal sins, right? So like pride, humility, you know, shame, compassion, right? Manipulation and falsehoods, right? Truth, you know, injustice, justice, right? Cooperation, war, famine, like this conflict, all these things. To me, it seems like these are like antithesis of the things that we needed to survive for a long time, because everyone's saying that the lobster needed to survive based on war. That's what Jordan Peterson's whole thing is. These lobsters battle each other, and then it gets bigger from the hormones, right? So it's this sort of material reward that it's achieving from winning a battle, whereas cooperation might be a better thing. Pride in its achieving its winning of a battle made this lobster bigger, but pride has become sinful in our post-Nietzschean view of Christianity. So we're looking at humility as an option there. I don't know if that's true, though. Maybe we need those things, though.
What about self-respect? I mean, because you can't really do anything else without self-respect. Like you can't really even be a good family member without self-respect. How can you really love anyone without a degree of self-respect?
See, I like where you're going way better than where I was going. Smarty pants. No,
No, that's
because
not mine. That's not mine. I didn't come up with that. So the story goes.
I didn't say you invented self-respect.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry.
No. You're right. You're right.
No, but where?
Cite your sources. Fine.
Okay, so there's some facility in like North Carolina or something where it's like a black site where they train tier 1 operatives, and within this site there's like a bar, right? And in this bar they have like a dartboard, they have whatever pictures up, and then they have this like I think it's a marker board, like just a wooden board where they write stuff on permanent marker. And the game is you write 2 things that is the meaning of life to you, right? Or you write 1 thing, but the game is you circle your thing and connect it to a different one that's already there. So once the whole board was just littered with all sorts of things from like the top guys, I guess, in armed forces saying like, this is the meaning of life. Apparently they all consistently, mostly just circled to self-respect. Like it looked like just this gigantic web, and at the middle was self-respect. So I thought that was really interesting, you know?
Yeah, I like that idea because pride versus humility, then we're trapped in this idea of cardinal sins, and we're reflecting on basically a pendulum between the two. But it's not, maybe there's something that's holistic between both of them. So in between pride and humility is the milieu of self-respect, right?
Can you open the links I just sent in private chat? There's 2, and this is from this supposedly from Plato. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, because there's the sins, there's the virtues, maybe even the second link, and then there is, so it's, for example, lust is the sin, chastity would be the virtue, and the middle ground, according to Plato's Book of Wisdom, would be wisdom in this case. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I like this matrix. Or it's more like a table.
Yeah.
This is I think where we're going. That there needs to be sort of a I wouldn't say quite the middle ground, but the meta that encompasses both lust and chastity is wisdom.
Yeah.
The meta that encompasses gluttony and temperance is moderation, I guess. The meta that comprises greed and charity is the common good. Is that right? I wonder about these. I think we could maybe do better than Plato. Is that too prideful?
Well, I hope so.
I don't know. So, okay, let's ask, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to come up with a better, so what do we between pride and humility, it's saying courage. Do you agree with that, Terrorrisk, or do you prefer a more specific, like self-respect I thought was better, but do you think that maybe just too reflective? Is courage as good as self-respect as an answer?
Courage is a tough one. I mean, I don't know, because like I'm trying to remember the moments where I really adopted courage, and it's usually like when I was on my back foot. You know, it's when things are like really stacked against you, and I think maybe that's when courage is necessary, right? Otherwise, like you're just gonna cower and get steamrolled conflict after conflict. That's no way to live. So you kind of do need courage to face the unknown. Okay, so that's really what courage boils down to. It's acceptance of the unknown. It's like you don't know what's going to happen. Are you going to do it anyway?
I think there's different kinds of courage. Like, it takes courage to have the guts to jump off a mountain with a hang glider, which I used to do. But then there's the courage of like expressing your views or having doing something that is of benefit to others that goes against the grain.
Yeah, I'm surprised like sacrifice isn't on like up here. Because sacrifice was like a big virtue.
One of the ones that stuck out to me was integrity, right? So between truth and deceit, there might be nuance to both. It's really valuable in certain circumstances to have deceit, right? And so there's certain times you need truth. I mean, like this is one of the things that I have a lot of qualms with, like Jordan Peterson, and one of them is his obsession with truth. I think truth is valuable to a point, and he has a problem when you're asking, well, what about if you have the Nazis at your door and you're hiding a Jew? Do you tell them the truth? But he's like, but the moment you've gotten to that point, you've made so many mistakes that you can't. It's like, really, the answer is not that complicated. It's integrity, right? Like integrity is do you use truth or do you use deceit is based on your integrity. So integrity might be the answer there. And I think that's maybe something that's missing from Aristotle that's taken as wisdom, but between lust and chastity, like, is that true? Like, maybe sacrifice fits in between lust and chastity as well, because you're looking at this idea of, lust for, the game. Some people love the game, right? To play the game, so like to date women or to find men. It's a game. And then chastity is sort of the, refusal of this, and the the sacrifice is maybe in between, because you might make a sacrifice to be a family man or to be a mother, as well as make a sacrifice to be a monk or something. Maybe sacrifice. I mean, wisdom is something that I think is broader, something that maybe all of these would be, wisdom would be using metas of these virtues and sins.
This is definitely like I think that's like, there's a difference between like a top down approach to like, your center versus the ground up approach to like ascension, quote unquote. I mean, I think in reality, they're supposed to take you to like the same place of, I guess, holistic consciousness or holistic wellness. So, I mean, you could think of it that way. It's like, if you really are in such like a strong materially severe situation in life, then it's probably better to adhere to like strict frameworks like that, strict like, these are the virtues and these are the sins, just stay away from it. And that also kind of reminds me of like in different states of abundance and scarcity. Like if you're in a state of scarcity, you should probably lean more towards something like the Übermensch, Nietzsche, something that Nietzsche would kind of aspire to. But after that, if you manage to get yourself into abundance, then you should turn to the Knight of Faith kind of deal from Kierkegaard. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's interesting because they also busted something open ahead where you just talked about sins in such a way, because sins usually mean missing the mark and doing the wrong thing. But I can think of moments where sloth, pride, greed, deceit, and wrath all are valuable. There's moments when all of, any of these sins have a place. And so the meta is bigger, and we should be looking at it more holistically. So, but like, I like humility and pride being the meta of self-respect a lot. I think that actually opens the door, because it means that sins are maybe obsolete the way lobsters are as well. That sin itself might be something that is anything misused at the wrong time, way broader than the cardinal sins. That sin can still exist, but it's just doing the wrong thing for that time.
Negative polarity, you could call it.
Yeah, like justice and greed, right? Like justice and injustice isn't even really the correct opposite of each other, because injustice based on justice, what does it mean? So it's really greed versus justice. But justice isn't necessarily always virtuous, because tear the baby in half. Is that right? I mean, it's just, if the story of Solomon, where there's a mother and another lady, and they're trying to figure out whose baby it belongs to. And he says, well, the just thing to do is to tear the baby in half. But then Solomon doesn't even do the just thing. Solomon figures, one of the women who's the real mother says, just give the baby to her then. Don't tear my baby in half. Just give it to her if that's the better thing to do. And then he gives the baby to that woman because
I was just thinking, like a king like Gilgamesh or something would say, greed is justice. Give the baby to me for me to command, because then it won't be torn in half. I'll decide for its well-being. Right. Yeah.
Which is kind of what happens and leads to most religions. Like you can think of Ignatius Loyola, right? Give me your boys and I'll turn them into men. Go forth and set the world on fire. That whole idea. Andreas bought chart on several levels and self-maximize to share. Check messages for link or mod. Please see me for 10 seconds. You sent this probably in X or in Messenger, I'm assuming. I will look for your message in a second. Yeah. So in other words, fairness, like what's right and fair is not always what's just. And so justice and greed might play into what we decide. Does that make sense? These sins are all American holidays. Yeah. I think that's that plays into this as well. But that's a biblical truth that there's a time and a place for everything. To everything, there is a season, Ecclesiastes. Right? So even for all the sins, there is a place.
Agreed.
You were talking about sin being missing the mark, but it's also without, right? It's the absence of, and I think that the absence of connection to source, or going against natural law, you could say as well, that would just you know, we're in sin because we're not in contact with source, and we're making poor decisions as a result.
Well,
I mean, okay, so I just want to give my take. I mean, I agree. You're probably absolutely correct. But from my understanding, if I had to guess, I think that the path would be to understand that source is in all of us, you know, like just the soul aspect. Because if we're nothing but our bodies and minds, then that will really separate us from some metaphysical entity, apparently, where our consciousness comes from. So I think it's important to try to entertain the idea maybe that God is in you, or source is in you, or like a fractal of it is in you, and that's what connects you to like everything. Because if you're connected to source, you're connected to everything, so you care about everything. You're more compassionate.
I think that's true. The idea of gratitude being, that's why you're right when you say gratitude is the most important meta virtue, because gratitude is a sense of, it's an empathic sense of self-awareness that is respect for yourself inside of the meta and everything around you. It's a meta perspective. So you're seeing that you're part of a bigger picture, and you're grateful for what you have to work with, and you're seeing what you're supposed to do with that, because you're trying to figure out how to, I mean, how can you be grateful? How can you have gratitude? How can you show gratitude? And showing gratitude is maybe like reimbursement or compensation for being blessed.
At best, gratitude is like a divine action, and at worst, it's just a useful delusion. But either way, it's good, you know? Because that's the interesting thing about gratitude, right? It's also an action. It's not just like an emotion. Like, you don't just feel grateful. You could also act out gratitude just by doing it internally, saying like, thank you, God. Thank you, whatever. Thank you for watching.
Initiative too. I think it's something that gives you cause for initiative, to show initiative. If you're going to try to make something happen, it's because of gratitude. You're saying, well, I have been given this, and I really owe something back to the universe. And it's also out of gratitude. What am I grateful for? Then it calls into accounting. You're accounting for what you have to be grateful for.
Yo,
So,
this is why gratitude is potent effing stuff, guys. Like, don't just mess around with it. If you really use gratitude in your self-inquiry, you're going to be taken to some crazy places.
what about this? Sylvia says a useful delusion is better than a hopeless truth. Do you guys agree, or do you see like a
I don't know.
problem with that?
I would at least like the choice to know that there's a hopeless truth versus a useful delusion, and knowing that I consciously choose the useful delusion. You know, I'd like to know that, at least get to choose knowing that I'm going with
the
delusion.
truth ever really hopeless? Not
And
that
is a
anyone can
delusion
really
ever really
determine the
useful?
truth.
How can a delusion be useful unless you know it's maybe the knowledge that a delusion is what makes it useful, so it becomes a truth. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. This is why I chose to just go with it. Like, I really just leaned into it 100%. I was like, I can't think of anything that could kill this, you know, just to go with gratitude, because I'm in a position of life to do so, and what I ought to be grateful for that, right? So there you go. Like,
Count your blessings.
exactly. Before you lose them. That's another thing. That's how you really win, is to count your blessings before you lose them.
And before you have them as well. Like, you know, isn't that the key to so many of these like self-help prosperity things, is you have to envision it happening before it's happened, and experience that as if it has, and feel the appreciation and feel the feelings that you would feel if that were already the case. That it's like the cornerstone of all of the self-help teachings.
Well, we went pretty deep, actually. I'm impressed with us. Thanks, boys. That was not so bad for.
I'm very grateful. Andreas, are you grateful?
I'm so grateful. That's the thing. Yeah, Terrorrisk, never.
No, I love it. Terrorrisk. It's very good.
Yeah,
Really,
it's
every
really
time you
deep.
come back with it, it's a common trope. But I'm like, yeah, it's so true. And people oftentimes seem to
Pragmatic
miss
as
the
fuck.
idea exactly how pragmatic it is, and has immediate effect, because you could be pissed off about anything in any situation.
It's medicine.
Or you could see it in a grateful way. You know, it's always, you know, what you put out is what you get back, or how you perceive a thing is how it will influence you. So.
And I don't mind it, because I'm like, I feel like we teach best what we most need to learn. And I think right now it's like, that's probably, my intuition tells me like, that's probably what I most need to focus on.
I'm grateful for change. Yeah, that's fair. I ought to be. I think there's an omega theory to everything, and what it is like, rather than being eccentric becoming heterodox, right? And so what you have to do is connect the horseshoe theory together by being the insanity and the schizophrenia in between political science and emotion and philosophy, and be a communist, fascist, transgendered purple belt. That's basically where you got to be. Well,
Is there a direct overlay with the houses of the zodiac on that chart?
that's something we could work on. I'll definitely I'll start thinking about that. That's something. Well, okay. Anything you guys want to cover before we go? I want to say again, thank you for being here in Stellium. You know, I have this Pavlovian training that you're always on the other side of the planet, and so I, will ask you to do a show, and it'll be 2:00 in the morning where you are. But now we're in the same zeitgeist, so that's kind of nice. So we should probably do more shows together. We should do something pretty soon if you're into it. That'd be great. I'm glad you were here.
Sounds good. I had fun. Thanks for the invite, Raph. I appreciated it.
Dude.
Yeah, I've got a busy few months ahead of me. I'm going to Australia for a conference in August, and then to London for another in September. And I'm going to be launching my book September 17th.
Oh, it's really happening, isn't it?
It's finally happening. I've got it. Well, here. I have it in physical format now. Which
really?
Is nice.
Show me the book. What?
Yeah, that's pretty baller.
Everyone's got to buy this book. This is not just some sort of like.
I love physical copies.
His book is about how he was the first hacker to be jailed. It's a Hacker Prince. Yeah, it's a key. It's key.
The era of freaking.
Here, we'll pull it up if you got it. Here, look at this.
There
this is
it
the Hacker
is.
Prince.
Yeah.
The true story. Look at him. That's him as a young man being taken and forced by the NSA or CIA or whomever to like tell people about how hacking kids really work and exist. I mean,
so there's a fun thing
cool.
that happened, Andreas, when you interviewed me on that subject, like, I don't know, 4 years ago or something. Wait, where'd you go?
You're still here.
Oh, there you are.
Hold on. Let me just. How do I even? Here, let's switch it around a little bit. There you go. Okay.
When you interviewed me, you brought up Gary McKinnon, and I had known about him years before, and then sometime later he actually made a comment on my YouTube channel. But if you hadn't been talking about him in that interview, I wouldn't have recognized him, right? Because I just wouldn't have made the connection. But I saw his name, and I'm like, that sounds familiar. And then I looked closer at the little bubble for his icon, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the hacker guy, And so I sent him a little 3-minute video of just a promo video that I had done back when I did a failed Kickstarter campaign for the book several years ago. And he was like, we should talk. And so we ended up having a number of conversations, and kind of, I wouldn't go so far as to say we became friends yet, but he's written the foreword to my book. So I'm really
pretty
thrilled.
good. That's a pretty good situation,
Yeah, and
well,
then I work as a chiropractor. One more quick story. I work as a chiropractor, and a few years back, the former head of the Interpol cybercrime division came into my office as a patient, and we started talking.
Lower back pain.
Yeah, it was just hilarious. And I was like, oh, I've got a little bit of a background in that. And he's like, oh, really? And I said, yeah, but I was on the other side of the fence. And he's like, you were a hacker? So we had this fun conversation. So he's written a blurb for the back of my book as well. So I've got Gary McKinnon doing the foreword, and former head of Interpol cybersecurity has written something. So things are coming together finally after.
It's pretty sweet.
This is the 40-year anniversary. It'll be 1 month to the day short of 40 years from the day I was busted.
Oh my God. Well, I'll light a candle. We need to definitely do another show, and maybe we should put together a panel for you with some of these people. I mean, it'd be great to get Gary McKinnon and you to talk. Actually, if he's interested, we could also do a show. But definitely, everyone buy this book.
There's a 90-minute conversation he and I had on my channel called Hackers from Heaven. And that is an interesting conversation. It's mostly me telling my story because I already knew a lot about his at that point. But there's actually more material that we recorded that I haven't released yet, but I'll do that as the book is getting closer to publication. So.
Yeah, everyone check out his work. He's got some incredible work talking about petrified titans as well on the Stellium 7 channel. So make sure you're subscribed to Mike's channel here. And everything you could ever wonder about.
Geology is the thrust of my whole channel. So
alternative takes on everything, right? So,
Yeah.
but particularly, he's done a lot of work and research in geology. We've even climbed through a giant fossilized elephant in Spain. So, and I'm convinced. So, I definitely want you guys to subscribe to his channel and check out some of the work he's done. And yeah, get that book if you're interested in the history of the collapse of our civilization and what they did to kids and the beginning of the new technocratic order and what they do to kids. It'll blow your mind.
I was the first of many people getting raked over the coals for the crime of hacking. So
what an exciting guinea pig you were, right? All right.
Definitely. All right, guys.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you all.
There's philosophy in me.